Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars.
They were the Marco Polos and Magellans of our time. And in September 2012, they said farewell to a modern-day Columbus.
Neil Armstrong became a testament to of what can be achieved through vision and dedication.
But that eulogy for the first man on the moon, delivered by the last to leave it, captures the spirit of all those who made that journey.
Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars.
American heroes whose final mission ended more than 40 years ago. I'm Neil Cavuto reporting from the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex in Florida. It is hard for people my age to believe that most Americans weren't even alive the last time a man walked on the moon. Apollo 17 astronaut Gene Cernan on December 14th, 1972. A number of the explorers who made that trip have passed away. The rest are now in their late 70s, some 80s. But the story they tell still sounds like something out of the future, not the past. It's a story about how America, with a combination of vision, high-tech know-how, and good old-fashioned courage, answered the challenge of arrival, stepped into the unknown, and achieved what almost seems as unbelievable today as it was a half-century ago. It was October 4th, 1957, at the height of the Cold War, that the Soviets launched a beach ball-sized satellite named Sputnik, which orbited the Earth in just over an hour and a half.
They tell us the world may never be the same again.
In 1957, when I was still in flight school, Sputnik was launched, and that's the beginning of the space age.
The dawn of the space age was the start of the space race, America competing with the Soviets for scientific dominance. But in a world where Americans dug bomb shelters and worried about missile gaps, science spelled national security.
The Cold War had been prolonged. It was going on. Nobody could really see an end to it. There were all the underlying risk of nuclear confrontation at the time.
The next step in that race, manned launches that required a few good men, 7 to start with.
There was 110 originally people that were selected by the Air Force and the Navy to become astronauts. It whittled down to 32 after the interviews and things like that. 32 of us went to Loveless Clinic, and I was the only guy to flunk.
How come you didn't pass the Mercury physicals?
I had what was known as a high bilirubin, which was a pigment in your blood, and so with that they said, well, you know, you're out.
You had said at the time, when you're a little boy, you can either be into dinosaurs or rockets. You were not into dinosaurs.
When I didn't get in the Mercury program in the original selection, I said, I was interested in rockets before those guys could spell it, you know.
Project Mercury began in 1958 with the goals of putting a human in orbit and doing so before the Soviets did. On that second count, they failed. 3.5 years after the Sputnik shock, on April 12, 1961, the Soviets outpaced the U.S. once again when cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space.
Well, they beat us into orbit, so we were behind. We were lagging.
America scrambled to catch up. Less than 1 month later, on May 5th, Alan Shepard, one of the Mercury 7, became the first American in space. Just over 3 months into his presidency, John F. Kennedy, like millions of other Americans across the country, was glued to his television.
Alan Shepard became an instant hero that this country needed. But the fact of life is Gagarin had circled the Earth a month before, and Alan went up and came down 16 minutes.
JFK, his sights set on beating the Soviets, sought out advice from NASA's top engineers. One was famed rocket scientist Wernher von Braun.
At Huntsville, Alabama, President Kennedy, here with missile expert von Braun, begins a 2-day tour of U.S. space centers.
I read a letter from Wernher von Braun that he wrote to Kennedy when he said, how can we beat the Russians? And von Braun's letter basically said, we can't beat them anywhere except to be the first on the moon. And so that's what we committed to.
May 25th, 1961, the president made a dramatic announcement before a joint session of Congress.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
We didn't go to the moon to collect rocks. We went to the moon to stick the flag in the moon before the Russians did.
If we didn't have the Cold War, would Kennedy have had the same zeal?
No.
To have something that would show America's ability to respond to a challenge, as well as to do it in a full, open, and peaceful way, I think really did catch the imagination of the American people and of the politicians at the time.
Catch the imagination it did.
We're underway.
On February 20th, 1962, John Glenn, in a spaceship dubbed Friendship 7, became the first American to orbit the Earth.
Oh, that view is tremendous.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
The Mercury program would ultimately have 6 manned flights, each mission a step closer to the ultimate goal. Then, as Mercury was winding down on November 22nd, 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated.
To honor his memory and the future of the works that he started, the NASA Launch Operations Center in Florida shall hereafter be known as the John F. Kennedy Space Center.
In April 1964, NASA launched Project Gemini, Latin for twins.
The Gemini was started, and it was a 2-man spacecraft.
The Gemini program was specifically to show that we could do a rendezvous and dock.
In order to get to the moon, you had to have a capability of 2 weeks in space. You had to be able to rendezvous. You had to be able to, you do EVA, get outside the spacecraft in the spacesuit, and you had to have a guided reentry. We practiced all of those missions in Gemini. So Gemini was an extremely important part of the lunar program.
On June 3, 1965, on Gemini 4, astronaut Edward White became the first American to perform an EVA, extravehicular activity, or spacewalk.
I feel like $1 million.
America was still playing catch-up, however. Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov had performed a spacewalk 3 months earlier. The big prize was still up there in the night sky, and the Gemini missions were moving forward, each one providing NASA with more information necessary for that ultimate quest.
We're on our way, Frank.
In December of 1965, Gemini 7 rendezvoused with Gemini 6A in orbit, making it the first manned spacecraft to do so. Gemini 7 also doubled the amount of time any man had been in space.
Many doctors at that time said, you know, people can't live in zero gravity for too long. But of course, we went up there for 2 weeks, and we did see some changes in the body, but it was nothing that couldn't be overcome. And
That was significant, right? Because that meant that we could go to the moon, that we could chance a mission of that duration, if not longer. And that changed people's perspective.
Because the moon flights were saying the max probably be about a 2-week flight,
Right.
and we had to make sure that the people were, you know, able to function in that respect.
The 14-day mission has shown us that man indeed adapts to the spaceflight environment. The additional data allows us to medically commit man to a lunar mission.
America's next step, the Apollo program, would get us to the moon, but Apollo almost cratered as soon as it began. Fox News reporting continues after the break.
DVD